Howdy, Immortalium here, and today I thought I might discuss something that is a little different and a bit specific, which will require me to explain some things. So first off, I should explain that in case you aren't aware yet on this channel, I am very much into collecting physical media. I like to collect DVDs and Blu-rays as well as, books, etc., etc. And living in Ireland, there was a certain classification board that I've come across pretty much all of my life, but it's only relatively recently when I started running into problems with them, frustrations if you will. And so I thought today it might be interesting to discuss my frustrations with the BBFC. Now, I do think it's important that I explain who they are, since unless you come from Ireland or the UK, or you're familiar with ratings boards around the world, you're unlikely to be aware of what they are. So first off, the name stands for the British Board of Film Classification. Basically, if a film or a TV series gets released in the UK, it is given a rating by the British Board of Film Classification. Like what age the work is appropriate for, as well as, maybe some specific details about things that might, upset people. Things like threat, things like perhaps torture or stuff, etc., etc. Just giving kind of consumers some idea about what they're going to be watching. And that is good for the most part. I do appreciate that system because it can be very helpful in many aspects of my life. But there are certain issues with them, and I'm hoping to go into them today. So really, this frustration began when I was getting back into horror. And I was searching for films that I hadn't watched yet in the horror genre, whether they be new or old, etc., etc. And there is a film that I do think is fair to say that it's rather notorious, but regardless, it is a very important work in the genre of horror and exploitation film, and that is a film called I Spit on Your Grave. Now, I think it's important to note that as of this video I have not seen the film. I do want to watch it someday, mainly because of its historical value. I do know that a lot of people out there don't think it's a particularly good movie, but I would like to have my own thoughts and opinions on it someday. Maybe I'll agree. But regardless, the reason that I grew frustrated at the BBFC, specifically with this film, is that there was a release of the film in 2020. And at first I was quite excited about it. It's a Blu-ray release. It seems to have a lot of very good extras on it. But I did some research into that release, and it turns out that the film in that form is cut. Specifically, there is a 1 minute and 41 seconds cut from the film. And while that might not seem like a lot, but for me, if I'm going to watch a film like this, I would rather watch the completely uncut version of the film, no matter how rough it is, to have an idea and an opinion on it. And so, unfortunately, I decided I won't pick that up. I know it's been uncut in a couple of other countries, so I could probably look into some international editions. But regardless, the basic point is that they are cutting films and releasing them. And to a certain degree, I understand where the BBFC is coming from. For instance, they have this quote here, and I won't read it out loud because YouTube might go a bit crazy if I say a certain word in this quote. But the quote in many ways seems decently reasonable until you realize that there's a lot of content out there in film and TV, etc., etc., that is genuinely disturbing, and those films get released anyway. Like, think of any of those war movies. Think about how violent and graphic many war movies can be. But just because a film is violent and graphic, it doesn't mean that someone's going to go out and replicate it. They might, if this person is, particularly disturbed or deranged, but in those cases, they're going to find something that inspires them. So it wouldn't be the film's fault in that specific case. And similarly, with regards to movies like these, I think that it is up to the consumer, if they've been informed enough, if they know what kind of experience they're going to be going into, to decide whether or not they want to watch said film. Now, the BBFC has had a long history, I should say, or a decently long history of censoring films, going back all the way to the period of video nasties. Now, for those who are particularly enthusiastic about horror and the horror industry, you will probably already know what video nasties are, but for those who are unfamiliar with it, allow me to explain quickly what they are. So, In the 1980s, we saw VHS being released. And at the time in Britain, VHS tapes weren't rated. So they were released with no rating, and anyone could pick them up. And of course, as you can imagine, given all the types of movies out there, there were plenty of videos getting in the hands of people that shouldn't be watching the content within. So then the British government released the Video Recordings Act, which mandated that all video releases, which today extends to DVD and Blu-ray releases, etc., basically any home video release must be rated by the BBFC in order to be released in the country. Which means being refused a age rating means that your film is essentially banned from the country. And at the time, a bunch of films ended up going into the category of video nasties, where they were banned from release. This includes many very notable films, such as Cannibal Holocaust, such as The Burning, and many others. A lot of these films, it wasn't until relatively recently that they managed to come out in at least some way decent form. Some of them are still censored today, and that can be quite frustrating, but thankfully many of them have managed to be released uncut over here. For instance, the film I reviewed last week, Blood Feast, I believe was on one of these lists. That's probably one of my greatest frustrations with the BBFC. Unlike in many other countries, they have to give a rating of some kind. If they refuse to give a rating, the film can't be released. So some people might be watching this video and wondering to themselves, Immortalium, how would you fix the system? How would you reform the BBFC? Now, the BBFC in all likelihood is not going to be watching this video, and they're not going to take anything I say into account, but regardless, I have thought of some ideas of how they could improve themselves. Something that I've noticed as I've explored the world of horror films and exploitation films is that the 18s rating actually doesn't mean that much. There are a lot of 18s films that I've seen that are quite tame, in contrast to many 18s films where, it's really disturbing content. So I think there is a big gap between those films, despite the fact that they are rated 18s. And so I do think it would be interesting for the BBFC to release another rating above the 18s rating. Maybe not restricting it from people who are 18 or older, but informing them that the film contains more intense content than your average 18s film. And finally, I think that the BBFC rating shouldn't be mandatory. I do think that companies should be encouraged to use the BBFC system. For example, maybe a lot of distributors would prefer to have an age rating on the box rather than sell something that doesn't have the age rating. But I do think companies themselves should be allowed to release a DVD or Blu-ray with their own rating, similar to how some other countries handle the rating systems. Because ultimately, I think that as consumers, we're entitled to watch whatever we want as long as it's, doesn't harm people in the real world. And so it's just a case that I would love to see a lot of these horror films, these exploitation films, etc., get uncut releases in the UK and Ireland. And while the BBFC does provide a good service, they have been quite helpful in the past, I do think they could be much improved in order to remove a lot of the frustrations that I currently have against them. So that was my discussion about my frustrations with the BBFC. Of course, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on all this. For instance, were you aware of the BBFC and what they do? Were you aware of Video Nasties? That was a pretty interesting time for horror and exploitation films. If you're from another country, what does your ratings board do? Is it mandatory to get the ratings? How do they handle it? How would you improve the BBFC? Do you have any recommendations that I might not have thought of that would improve the BBFC and remove many of these frustrations? And of course, if you have any additional information about the BBFC, about censorship and horror films and exploitation films, please leave it in the comments below. And of course, if you want to support the channel, I would encourage you to use my Amazon affiliate links in the description below. When you purchase Horror 2, those affiliate links, not only supporting me, not only supporting the channel, but you're supporting the horror industry. So I'd highly encourage you to purchase your Horror 2 affiliate links. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye bye.